Okay, well, I think we should get going. We're going to have ample opportunity for everybody to meet. So welcome everyone. Shana Tova, how wonderful to be together. I'm Howard Schwartz. I'm a Mlynov descendant from the Gruber and Dem family. And my co-host is Richard Polt from the Goldsecker and Fishman family. I hope you and your families are well and appreciate you being here. I'm especially pleased to welcome a few of our Israeli descendants. Brochim habayim, ani ma'od sameach she'atem mishtatfim bepigisha hamashma'otit hazot. I know of at least two recent losses among us. Condolences to Harold Goldberg and my cousin, Rabbi Steve Schwartz. If there's others, I encourage you to use the chat, which you can find below in your toolbar, and you can say hello to other people that way. As I said, this session will be recorded and available later. A little bit of housekeeping. Rich and I want to share a few things. So with a crowd this size, it's important everyone know how to mute and unmute themselves. You can find your mute button on the toolbar at the bottom of your screen, as well as chat. If you don't see the buttons here, you may need to expand your Zoom screen and select the more with the three dots. When we get started, Rich will be he's already put everybody on mute. When the time comes, you can take yourself off mute to speak, but we'll be keeping the background noise to a minimum. I guess the other thing we'll say is we're going to have 3 breakout sessions, so you get to meet a bunch of people. And then during my talk, please save your questions till the end. We're planning for there to be time at the end where you can ask questions or interact with the larger group. Anything else, Rich?
No, I'm going to keep admitting people as they show up. And no, it's all you, Howie.
Okay. Well, first, I'd like you to see the family lines represented here. I think I got everybody, although people were still signing up at the last minute. So just want to give you a chance to look and see. I think I counted them earlier this morning, at least 28 or 30 family lines. I'm just using the family line names that go back to Mlynov. So I'll give you a second just to review that. And here's our agenda today. So we have already covered housekeeping. We're going to immediately give you a chance to interact in a moment with other people in a breakout room, and Rich will discuss the questions, how to guide that. We'll come back together. Our themes today are commemoration and celebration, and I'll talk more about that. There's both sides, both meanings today for us. I'm going to give a tour of Mlynov. It's both a tour of Mlynov as I've learned about it from the memorial book, as well as a tour of the new translation of the Yisker book. So that'll be my talk today. I hope you learn a lot. Then we'll do a breakout again. Then we have a couple of our survivors who are with us. We're going to ask them to say a few words, and somebody from the next generation. And then we have a special guest who's a descendant who's doing work with Ukrainian Jews who've been fleeing to Moldova. And Marc will give us an update about what's happening. Those who are interested, we hope to have a deeper dive on that topic at a subsequent date. And then we'll do a breakout room again, and then we'll just come back together and open it up. So that's our agenda. And Rich, I think we are now ready for the first breakout room. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, sure. And then each of you are going to have about a minute, 90 seconds to just quickly introduce yourself. So your name, where you live, your Mlynov family connection.
Okay, we're going to put everybody on mute again, and then we'll get going.
All right, we should all be back. We should be set.
Okay. Well, I hope everyone had a nice time meeting folks here. As I said earlier, the themes today are commemoration and celebration. Celebration for what was lost, commemoration for what was lost and celebration for what we have brought back to life. 80 years ago on the Jewish calendar, today, tomorrow, right around now, on the 28th, 29th of Tishrei, the Mlynov ghetto was liquidated. There were approximately 2,000 people lost and only several dozen survivors. Every one of us, whether we know it or not, lost family that day. Some of us know the names of parents, siblings, aunts, and uncles. Others of us, like me, are descendants of families who came to America or went to Palestine before these tragic events. But since most of our families from Mlynov or Mervits intermarried with one another, we all lost relatives. We have with us today survivors and descendants from several families that appear in this photo, which was taken in the fall of 1944 by the survivors. The Steinberg family survivors are in this photo, and we have with us Gerry Steinberg, and I believe Aviva, the young girl in this photo who was rescued by the Steinbergs, is also with us today. Two of the Steinberg descendants, including my co-translator, were born in DP camps, and I just wanted to show you, I got a new copy of the Steinberg story. We've translated this into English, so if you're interested, you might want to read the Steinberg story. We have a number of descendants of the Teitelman family here as well. Many of the essays in the memorial book come from Mendel and Sonia Teitelman. And I was hoping that Helen would be able to join us, but she doesn't have support today for getting on Zoom, so I'm not sure if she's here. But I got a chance just recently to go present Helen with the new translation of the Yizkor book with my daughter Penina and together with my colleague, David Sukowski. We have Ezra Sherman here today with us, the young boy here with a Russian military uniform, as well as his daughters. I recently discovered that my great-grandfather had a sister who lived in Mlynov. We never knew that. That's her daughter, Matil, on the right, next to her husband, Feivelberger. Their daughter, Batya, is in front of them. This is a photo that Aaron Harari took of his family when he went back to Mlynov in 1937 and 1938 from Palestine. I think Aaron's son Zev is here with us today. Everyone in this photo perished, and I never knew these relatives of mine even existed, let alone that they perished. On this moment, 80 years after the ghetto's liquidation, we're reminded that our world is still in need of repair. The Ukrainian people who once were German collaborators now have a Jewish president, and now themselves are victims of Russian aggression. In our group, there are understandably complicated feelings about what is happening to Ukrainians, given their role as German collaborators. We live in a time, too, when hate-filled ideologies are gaining strength, even in our beloved United States. And we shall have an opportunity to get an update from Marc Siegel today, a descendant who's helping Ukrainian Jews who are refugees in Moldova. Let's take a moment of silence for all those who perished in Mlynov and Mervits and who still suffer today. In preparing for today, I spoke to several of you about what I should emphasize. People want to focus not on what we lost, but what we have brought back to life. And we have many reasons to celebrate today. We have brought the Mlynov Mervits communities back to life through our virtual community. There's something sacred or profound or moving, if you let me use those words, about reconnecting families that once lived in that those small towns together. Are you as amazed as I am that our parents, grandparents, and great-grandparents knew each other? How moved would they be to know that we have reconnected? We also have reason to celebrate the publication of the first fully translated and annotated version of the memorial book, the Yisker book. Growing up, I never knew anything about Mlynov or the memorial book. And when I did find out about it, I thought it was just about a lot of dead people and horrible stories. And I couldn't read it anyway, since it was in Hebrew and Yiddish. Partial English translations circulated thanks to Irene Siegel and Jean Schwartz and David Sokovsky. But we now have a full translation with recovered photos and explanatory annotations. I'm honored to be the midwife for this project. On the left is a photo of Sylvia Bardich Goldberg handing the original Yisker book to her family in 1970. Sylvia was the only American and only woman on the book committee that put this book together in 1970. She's handing the book to her niece, Edith Geller, and on the right is Edith Geller, now 99 years old, Kinahara, who recently wrote to me the following. You haven't heard from me since I received the Yisker book because it left me speechless. I never imagined it would become what it is, a history book and a geography book, as well as a memorial book. We now have a community of descendants who are rediscovering the place our families shared together. The stories about what happened between 1941 and 1944 are indeed difficult to read. But the memorial book also brings back these towns into focus at a time when life was better. It includes humorous stories, folk tales, childhood memories, and descriptions of geography. What I'd like to do is give a tour of Mlynov and Mervits today. I'll give you a brief tour and how our families remembered those places when life was still good. And it's a bit of a tour of the memorial book as well. As you know, Mlynov is today in Western Ukraine. Beginning in 1793, it became part of Tsarist Russia until the end of World War II, when it became part of Poland again until at the end of World War I, when it became part of Poland again until World War II. If we zoom in a little bit, and then zooming in again, Mlynov grew up at the crossroads, two crossroads, one north and south, between Lutsk and Dubno. Dubno, which was the closest town, got a train station in 1870. A number of people remember walking from Mlynov to Dubno. The east-west road connected Rovno in the east and Berezcheko to the west. You can't talk about Mlynov and Mervits without talking about the Ikva River that ran alongside the town. Mlynov probably grew up where it did as a mill town, and one writer says the word Mlynov may actually have come from the Slavic word for mill. Here's a picture of the Ikva River today.
Mm-hmm.
The last mill owner in town was a man named Yosel Gelberg. He brought electricity into town. Marc Gelberg, his great-grandson who's with us today, tells me his ancestral home is still standing in Mlynov. I hope to go back there one day and see it, God willing. In this photo, you can see the electrical wires that are running into town. This photo was taken in 1937 and 1938 by Aaron Harari when he went back to Mlynov. Helen tells me that she remembers the time when electricity actually was brought into town. According to one piece of folklore, the Ikva River got its name when the river froze into blocks of ice. They got caught on bridges and the water backed up and flooded the local towns. The Jews in town prayed to God. They used the Hebrew words that God used at creation to create dry land, Yikavu Hamayim. The waters receded and the residents called the river Ikva to honor their prayer. The Gentiles liked the name, so it stuck with them as well. This picture's from the Connecticut River, by the way. Here's an old Polish map from 1922, which helps you understand some of the essays in the memorial book. We go in a little closer. You can see the town of Mlynov along the Ikva River there. And heading just a bit north was the town of Mervits, or Marvica, as it was called in Polish. It was a sister town of Mlynov. In the memorial book, the writers from Mervits remember it as being quite a bit smaller than Mlynov and relying on the larger town for schooling, post office, and other institutions. According to the folklore in the memorial book, a tzaddik, or righteous man, died between these two towns. The story of the holy man, this holy man who died, was recalled by one of the writers in the memorial book named Eliyahu Gelman. He's the young boy in the white shirt in the photo to his left, to the left. He made Aliyah in 1939, and his daughter Ziva is with us today. He was the only one of his family to survive. He recorded the story of the tzaddik who died near Mlynov for the memorial book. And the story went like this. It was winter on the eve of Shabbat when the holy man was traveling on the road with his disciples, and he realized he was about to die. He knew his disciples wouldn't have a chance to take him to a Jewish cemetery before Shabbat. So he instructed his disciples to bury him on that spot. Sure enough, he expired soon, and his disciples carried out his instructions and buried him there. They planted a small tree on that spot, and on that spot, a tree grew in the shape of a menorah. A woman named Devorah Moyle remembered that memorial tree. She recalled walking by that tree with her girlfriends as a teenager. She's sitting here with two of her sisters and some friends in front of the Moyle house in Mlynov. Her nephew or great nephew, Danny, is here with us today. The Moyle family came to Mlynov in the mid-1920s when Mlynov needed to hire another shochet, a kosher slaughterer. I suspect the vacancy opened up when the butcher Anshel Steinberg cut his hand and died from an infection. Devorah later survived with three of her siblings when they fled east right after the Nazi invasion in 1941. In the memorial book, Devorah contributed a poem about that menorah tree. I'd just like to quote a little bit from her, from the memorial book. On the right, our community. On the left, Yessel Mayer Gelberg's mill. Rising on the green lawns, full of yellow flowers reaching until the monument, a mountain. On a mountain is the highway made of large pointy stones. That is the Mlynov Mervits Road. Every one of us remembers it. And after that, a straight road. On the right, standing even now in front of my eyes, the old tree with two large branches like arms stretched out to the sky. Children, we heard a legend about the tree that an important holy man was killed there. And before his death, he stretched out his arms to the sky, and he was buried on that very place. On the road from Mlynov to Mervits, graves were dug opposite our old friend, the tree. Parents and brothers buried alive. And you, old tree, what can you tell us of that black day now distant? The story about the tzaddik who died along the road was probably about a Rebbe named Aharon II. This Rebbe died in 1872, close to Mlynov, and put the town on the map. A memorial was built for him, and this is what it looks like recently. He was the grandson of the founder of a great Hasidic dynasty. It was called the Stolen Karlin Dynasty, named after two towns where the first Rebbes lived. Reb Aharon II lived from 1802 to 1872, and during his reign, this branch of Hasidism experienced tremendous growth and popularity in the area. After the Rebbe died, disciples would make pilgrimage to Mlynov on the anniversary of his death. This man was one of the Stoliner Hasids in Mlynov. He was called Itzik Staros. He was the great-grandfather of Sylvia Bardich Goldberg, the woman we saw earlier handing the original Yisker book to her niece, Edith. Sylvia, you can see there on the right, was born in Lutsk, but she used to go visit her grandparents in Mlynov, and she writes with great nostalgia about getting away from the crowded and dirty city of Lutsk and going for visits in the rural community of Mlynov. There, her grandmother taught her how to milk a cow and make butter. Sylvia recalls being there one time on the yahrzeit of the Rebbe's death. Disciples would make pilgrimage to Mlynov. At sunrise, we started to go to the grave of the Tzaddik, and we sang psalms and we wrote petitions. Among the mourners were Jewish mothers who cried and prayed. People came and left the shtetl. We sat telling stories about the miracles of the righteous man, which were all true. The belief and faith among the Hasids was so huge that even the non-Jews were affected. Here's the location of the Rebbe's memorial on the contemporary map. It still exists, or it did recently. And if we superimpose the contemporary map onto the old map, looking again at the 1922 map, I suspect the Rebbe's memorial is located where it is because that may be where the cemetery was located at the far end of town. I suspect the crosses were the way this Polish map represents the location of a cemetery. This is a photo from the memorial book of a woman by the name of Batsheva Rivets in the Mlynov cemetery, showing what the large tombstones look like. She made Aliyah in 1939 and was the only one of her family to survive. We know from an account of survivor Nachum Teitelman that many of the tombstones were removed during World War II for sidewalks and buildings. But he remembered that the tombstone of the mill owner, Yossel Gelberg, was still there after the war, and they tried to make it stand upright. This picture comes from the internet and was taken not long ago and is labeled Mlynov. I suspect these may still be there. While I was working on this presentation, I was thinking, wouldn't it be amazing if we could someday go back and restore them? And as this week, in fact, I looked more closely at one of the tombstones and was able to transcribe the words on the first tombstone. It belonged to Yoel, son of Avraham Yitzhak. Was this perhaps the man known as Yoel, son of Abraham, in the Goldsecker family tree? I think it could be. Close to the Ikfa River was the town square. You can see the square represented by a pentagon and one up in Mervits. On market days, the farmers and peasants from nearby would come to sell their products. They would also shop in Mlynov stores. Lipa Halpern remembers looking out his window towards the river and seeing the horses and riders coming by. This is a photo of the market square from 1918. You can see how crowded it was. And this was the largest synagogue belonging to the Trisk Hasidim, a different branch of Hasidism. There were actually 3 synagogues in Mlynov and 2 in Mervits. There were at least 3 different streams of Hasidism in town. And the memorial book tells us that serious conflicts and even fistfights used to break out over the style of praying. Matters improved after 1903 when the large synagogue burned down and the Trisk Hasidim built their own separate chapel. The men with the most prestige and wealth sat along its eastern wall. While most of the people in the towns observed Shabbat, they were not as strictly observant as the people in other places in Poland. No one wore the fur hats, the streimels, and women did not shave their heads when they got married. Not all the regular folks were strict about Shabbat observance, and some would leave town on the day of rest to enjoy the fresh air and the grass of the fields and the forest nearby. One of my favorite essays written by Aaron Harari recalls the pranks of the teenagers in town. A teenager like Ezra Sherman used to congregate in the back of the big synagogue in town and talk, not so different from adolescents today. The honored men along the eastern wall would yell at them in Yiddish to be quiet. They call them shketzim. I'm not sure I'm saying that right, but you vermin, go outside, they would yell. In revenge, the teenagers would grab the moist towels that had been used by those who said Asher Yatzar, the traditional prayer after relieving themselves. They would wad up the wet towels and throw them onto the heads of the elders. No one was ever caught. As far as I can tell, the synagogue building is still standing in Mlynov today. Perhaps one day we'll get to go back together to see it. And another recent photo. Across that you see there shows where one of the two churches in town stood. As one writer recalls, the focal point of the small town of Mlynov was the market square. At one end stood the Russian Orthodox Church. Along the river, opposite the Palace of the Count, stood a Polish church. On a number of narrow lanes around the market square stood Jewish homes. Behind the lanes of the Jews were streets of Ukrainian Gentiles. These streets were called the village. Baruch Marin, his grandson or great-grandson's here with us. Baruch Marin from Baltimore recalled that the alleyways were so narrow that when you made it out safely, you should bench Gomel, which is the prayer you should say for completing a safe journey.
Grandson, by the way.
Lippa Halpern remembered that in the fence around the church was a narrow gate of iron, which was always closed. Quote, when I peeked inside for the first time, I saw the statue of the cross on the wall, the hands and the feet bound to the cross and the head leaning sideways. At twilight, it seemed like he was alive. Who is this? I asked Yosela. Be quiet, it's forbidden to ask. But who is this? Who is this? Geez, it's forbidden to say. This is their God. Why is he hanging there? Don't talk so loud. You know he flies, but he doesn't have wings. Come on, let's escape quickly. An interesting photo in the memorial book shows the interaction of the religious leaders. Here's a class in public school with Rabbi Gordon on the right there, sitting next to the Russian Orthodox priest, the principal of the public school, and the Catholic priest. On the other side of the Ikva, to the west, was what the children called Mount Sinai, a large hill from which they could see the town. A young man named Moshe Teitelman published a nostalgic Hebrew essay in 1929 called My Hill, which is reprinted in the memorial book. He later changed his name to Moshe Tamari. His daughter Ziva is here today, and I realize I mentioned Ziva earlier when I was talking about Eliyahu Gelman, and Eliyahu's daughter is Rachel. So excuse me for getting that incorrectly. So Moshe wrote the essay about. He wrote the essay about the hill called Mount Sinai. And you can see Moshe here. He's the young man without the hat, third from the left. His hero was Yitzhak Lamdin, the famous Hebrew poet who was born in Mlynov and who had gone to live in Palestine in 1919. You can see Moshe there without the hat. He's standing next to his hero to the right, Yitzhak Lamdin. Yitzhak came back to Mlynov for a visit in 1931. And Moshe wrote an evocative essay. It's really moving. I recommend you read it about the visit of Yitzhak Lamdin to Mlynov in 1931. The teenagers were too mature to call the hill Mount Sinai. They called it Greenock. It was a hangout for teenagers who were involved in the Zionist youth groups in the 1920s and 30s, and they would go to the hill to escape the prying eyes of their parents. I suspect some of the teenagers had their first kiss up on the hill. Baruch Marin, who's on the top, sent this photo on a postcard to his girlfriend, Rosa Berger, who already made Aliyah in 1933. Rosa saved this photo, and her daughter, Agar, who's here today, shared a copy with me. Rosa helped Baruch get a certificate to make Aliyah in 1938, and were it not for their relationship, he would have perished with his parents and sister. The relationship with Rosa didn't work out, and Baruch ended up marrying Milka Shargel from Mlynov, who by this time had reached Baltimore via a stay in Mexico. When Mlynov youth, young people got their papers to make Aliyah, they would come to Mount Sinai to say goodbye, like Lippa Halpern here. This is the same Lipa who looked in the church as a young boy and saw Jesus hanging on the cross. He was older than most when he left finally Mlynov for Palestine, and his Zionist colleagues had delayed his getting papers because he was such a good organizer, they didn't want him to leave. His friend Yosela told him a story about how Mount Sinai was created. We don't know whether this tale was circulating in Mlynov or his friend made it up. According to the story, there was another righteous man, maybe it was the same one, passing by this spot where a church was located. When he was attacked by the dogs belonging to the local nobleman, he said an incantation and the earth swallowed up the dogs in the church, forming Mount Sinai. The story sounds a little bit like the Red Sea swallowing Pharaoh and his army, and it seems like the folklore from Mlynov often had biblical allusions such as this. Mount Sinai was not far from the Count's estate, the local nobleman who owned all the lands in the area, including the river, the towns, and the forest. This is a painting of that estate from 1870, just 2 years before the Rebbe died. Many of us have ancestors who were living in Mlynov and Mervits when it looked like this. The Count owned all the property in town, including the river, the forest, the houses, and he would lease these to the Jews. This grainy photo actually comes from a movie taken by A.D. Hirsch when he went back to Mlynov in 1935. And you can see the Count's palace across the river from that home movie. This is the view of the smaller palace, which is still standing in Mlynov today, and I believe is a museum. One day I fantasize that we can include some of our family stories in that museum or on its grounds. The Goldsecker family was the largest family in Mlynov, and Hirsch Goldsecker was the oldest of the 5 brothers who came to Mlynov in 1891. He was in charge of the fishing licenses for the Count, and only his wife was allowed to kiss the hand of the Countess. Several of the Goldsecker brothers had large families of their own, and this family photo is of one of Hirsch's brothers, Yankel Goldsecker. This is of Yankel Goldsecker, son of Hirsch's brother, Moshe Goldsecker. You can see Yankel's home to the right. This line has descendants in Israel. 3 of Yankel's children made Aliyah in the 1930s, and a 4th survived the Shoah, but died in the War of Independence in 1948. Next to Yankel Goldsecker's home, you can see the water carrier with a pole across his shoulder and 2 buckets of water, which he would deliver to each of the homes. According to Yehuda Moel, this water carrier was the subject of jokes and legends. He lived with his wife in a shtibel next to the synagogue, and he also served as a shamash. People used to say that he was so tall with long legs, when he came to a fence, he did not have to walk around it. He just had to lift a leg and he was over it. Did you know that the mud was so thick in the streets that your feet would get stuck? And the helper of the cheder teacher often had to carry the young children to cheder. There was a pond in the middle of town called the Kologia, which means the swamp. According to Aaron Harari, who took this photo, it came into being because the homeowners harvested all the oak trees and clay from the spot to build their houses. The kids would ice skate on the pond, and in the summer they would hear the frogs and see the moon shine on the water. North of the pond stood the Oliker synagogue, that was another branch of Hasidism, and across from it the ritual bathhouse. In the spring, when the ice melted, the water reached the doorways to the homes, and people had to lay down planks of wood so that they had walkways to get across the water. This other home in Mlynov belonged to Heikel, the lady's tailor. He owned the only gramophone in town. This photo was originally taken by Aaron Harari in 1937-38 and was preserved in the collection of Irene Siegel and Audrey Goldsecker. There's a poignant story told by Baruch Marin in the memorial book about Heikel and the gramophone. Heikel was very poor, and no one is sure how the gramophone came into his possession after World War I. Heikel used to play music after Shabbat, and all the people would gather under his window to listen. He played the records so often that they started to wear out, and the singing started to sound odd. One night, the young men of town made fun of the sounds, and Heikel was insulted. The gramophone and the music disappeared forever from the shtetl. I think this story is in many ways a metaphor for the fate of the town in general. And I hope you can hang with me. I'm getting not too far from the end. The memories of young people from that time are revealing. Mention should be made of the prankster in town. His name was Shmuel Mandelkern. He and a couple of his buddies were among the few Zionists in town before World War I. And his buddy on the right is Yitzhak Lamden, who later became the famous poet. The elders in town frowned on Zionism. They thought the Jews should wait for God to bring the Messiah. Sometime around World War I, Shmuel and his friend Yitzhak decided to prove the validity of Zionism by sending a young man to the land of Israel. They chose a poor young boy named Yaakov Yossi Gruber, who didn't have much opportunity ahead of him. They trained him in Hebrew and they educated him in Zionism. And they kept their plan a secret. They were afraid that they'd be stopped if anyone discovered their plan. The boys had to raise enough money to send Yaakov Yossi to Odessa, where he would have to pass examinations to get his papers to make Aliyah. They headed to a cousin's wedding in Trovitz, which you can see here on the map. And it was customary at the time to raise money during a wedding. It was winter and they headed out early on their sleigh. And to make a long story short, they got lost in the blinding snow and ended up in Panska Dolina, where the town suspected they were spies for Austria. You can see that town on the map. He just couldn't believe, how could Mlynov boys be so nicely dressed and not know where Trovitz was? They were thrown in jail and only released in the morning when they proved their identities by reciting the names of all the business people they knew in Mlynov. They continued on their way to Trovitz and the other towns you see here on the map, and eventually raised enough money to send Yaakov Yossi to Odessa. The boys didn't want anyone to see Yaakov Yossi catch a wagon ride to Dubno from the Mlynov town square, so they crossed the bridge over the Ikva River and they flagged down a farmer who was heading to Dubno. They took Yaakov Yossi's clothes and they placed him on the riverbanks as if he had drowned. In fact, at least 2 children from Mlynov drowned in the Ikva River that we know about. Long story short, the Mlynov boys knew they had failed when they got their first letter back from Yaakov Yossi from Odessa. He wrote them in Russian instead of Hebrew, and he told them about the marvelous time he was having, including meeting a beautiful young woman on a bench along a boulevard in the city. It turns out the joke was on the pranksters. Yaakov Yossi had informed his parents about the plan from the very beginning, and his parents decided to let the young Zionists pay for their son's trip to Odessa. Yaakov Yossi never planned to make Aliyah at all. Yaakov Yossi was later injured in World War I fighting, and the boys attributed this to God's punishment. Shmuel the prankster later married his friend Yitzhak's sister. Her name was Malka Lamden, and they made Aliyah about 1924. Joyce, who's with us today, tells me Malka was her mother's teacher in Mlynov. 2 last stories, and then we'll do some breakouts again. So thanks for hanging with me. Shmuel Mandelkern's pranking personality may be responsible for saving a number of Mlynov lives following the Bolshevik revolution, including my grandmother's. It was a dangerous time near Mlynov after the Bolshevik Revolution, with the remnants of the Tsar's armies circulating nearby, and one was stationed in the nearby town of Smordva, just west of Mlynov. In a rather amazing essay, Shmuel tells us how he organized self-defense units in Mlynov. At first, he had a hard time convincing the elders that defense was needed. They believed that Rebbe's memorial in town would protect them. But after cavalry units ransacked the town, The elders acquiesced, but only on the condition that the young defenders used sticks, not rifles. Eventually, Shmuel convinced the elders to let him buy 7 rifles. And he went to a Russian military unit stationed in Smordva, and he brought back 7 rifles. And eventually, there were 200 rifles in Mlynov, and one for each household. The young people organized 4 defense units. One of the defense units guarded Skolna Road, and I'm guessing a little bit here based on the map and the story. But Shmuel says it began at the corner of Yoel Goldseker's house and ended at the last house on the street at the home of Yosef Gelberg, the mill owner. The second unit was to guard the road that began from Yoel Goldseker's home to the Schulman home, which was the home of my grandmother. The map shows my guess where these were located. I never knew where my grandmother lived before. Her father, my great-grandfather, Sladek Schulman, was in charge of the forest on behalf of the count, and that is why the house was on the outskirts of town. Apparently, the youth of town used to go to the Schulman house to hang out and to rehearse plays when they put on theater productions. According to Mandelkern, the location of the Schulman house was strategic. It was encircled by a large expanse of fields, which led towards the villages of Sloboda and Osliv, and the main road that was regularly busy with movement 24 hours a day. And there was suspicion that attacks and malicious events would arrive from this direction. Here on the contemporary map, you can see the villages he names. And by the way, Sloboda is where the Goldsekers were working before they came to Mlynov. At the Schulman house, they would shoot tens of thousands of bullets, and the noise would reach all the farmers in the area, and they would sing Russian war songs, and this put great fear into the people of the nearby villages, and nobody would try anything against Mlynov. You can imagine my surprise when I was translating the Hebrew and read that they liked to train at my grandmother's house because the 3 Schulman daughters were pretty. Here's 3 of the Schulman daughters with Ben Fishman in the middle. Apparently, they were studying with the Ikva River in the background. I could go on and on with stories. It was really hard to try to get it down to 30 minutes. I know I ran a little over, so thank you for your indulgence. I'm hoping that maybe in the future, those who want to read together, maybe we can have a reading group once a month as a way to continue reading about these stories. I hope you enjoyed the tour and that it helped you visualize a little bit what this town's life was like and the life of those who lived in Mlynov and Mervits. And I'm going to ask Rich to set us up for our breakout session again.
Great. Thanks, Howie. Why don't you stop the screen share? So that's a lot to process. And I know that just hearing you go through that, my mind was going in a million different places. And so what we thought would be nice would be to take an opportunity to allow us each to have a chance to maybe process this and reflect with a few other people. We're going to break up into groups again, smaller groups slightly, about 6 people. We're going to take about 12 minutes again. And we're each going to take a couple minutes to go around. We'll do a super quick introduction, Rich Polt from Baltimore, from the Goldseker line. And then maybe share one thing, maybe 2 things that struck you from that presentation, something that was particularly interesting that you didn't know, that you found surprising. I love the story about the menorah tree. I don't think I had heard that one before with the picture. And then maybe just take it a little further and reflect upon how you felt when you were hearing that presentation. What did it bring up for you to hear those stories, vis-a-vis your connection to them? So that's what we're going to do. I will put those questions or those prompts in the chat. You should see them now. And we're going to go back into breakout rooms. Welcome back.
There are a lot of folks on both my sessions that were interested in how we're all related to each other. So I figured Howard would have some of that. I don't think he's got ancestry quite linked up for the entirety of Mlynov, but he.
Pretty close.
Getting there. Need a few DNA tests.
That'll be the next section, the next session that we do, where we start figuring out how we're all cousins.
I remember at the first session, you had on the wall some charts that gave people orientation.
Right. All right.
I don't know how you
All
do
right.
that on
Welcome
Zoom.
back, everyone. I'm gonna mute all again, and then Howie, you come off of mute. I had, by the way, tried to create different groups, and the functionality wasn't working for me. So you got to see people who you already met. So maybe that was a good thing, but it's all you, Howie.
Okay, well, this part of the presentation, I really wanted to invite at least two of our survivors, and a third might be able to get on, but maybe start if Ezra would like to say a few words, and then Gerry, and if Helen's on, we'll get Helen to say a few words too, just their reflections that they want to share with us. So let's start with Gerry. Gerry, can you come on?
Can you hear me?
We can.
Oh, great. It finally worked for me. Well, first of all, I'd like to thank Howard and Hanina for the fantastic, just absolutely beyond my imagination job that he has done to revive the little shtetls of Mlynov and Mervits. It's unbelievable what you have done. Obviously, I kind of try to remember things, and I feel really, now I feel sorry for not being more inquisitive about what went on before, other than I used to hear my parents talk to people that, fellow survivors in various parts of the country and Israel and so on. And in retrospect, I really feel sorry for not questioning more, but Howard really revived my interest in what went on and trying to remember some things that I can remember. Obviously, I was a very young child when the Germans came into our area, and I kind of divide my life into 4 different lives. So my earliest life, let's say up to about age 4, was really, I remember very little as a child. The only thing I remember is my parents talking about the people that lived around us when I was born, and the river Ikwa. And part that I remember is they always told me that I liked to play on the river. And in those days, they used to soak flax on the river to make it pliable, to make material out of it. And I remember they would tell me that I used to like to play on the flax on the river. So that was my early life, and I really remember very little. And the next part was the next, I'd say, 2.5 years, up to about age 7, hiding with my parents from the Germans and so on. And I have some memories in our hidden. We were very fortunate that my father trusted 3 different or 4 different actually Polish, Polish and Ukrainian farmers who saved us. And we were very fortunate that they did not give us up, as many stories are told. And so, at age 7, we after being liberated, we actually lived in Mlynov. And I remember my parents saying that we lived in the wolf's house, the rabbi's house. And we stayed there for about a year. But, and I remember how things kind of looked in Lynn at that time, with most of the few survivors who were there, and have made homes for themselves. My father did, finally got some horses and so on. That only happened for about a year, and then we left the area, and then we came the next part, which is the American zone in Germany, and life was fantastic and compared to what it had been before. And we emigrated to the United States on July 2nd, 1949. That's the best part of my life, and hopefully it'll continue for a few more years.
Let's
If
just,
anybody has any questions,
it's just such an honor, I know for me, and I'm sure for everybody else, that I've gotten to meet you and Ezra and Helen and Aviva. So thank you for your reflections. Vivi, is Ezra ready to say something?
He fixed his bandage. I just want to say something that he might not say, because your theme is commemoration and then celebration. I think all of us as descendants, it really is so important to bear witness and to be the speakers of the past, because in our little town, all these multitude of things happen, but this is the same in so many communities and so many ethnicities. And so the validation of the next generation, I think it is really important to bear witness and speak out, and whatever is in your heart, and to try to make a difference because of what was happening, for the good and the bad, in the past. So that's what I wanted to say. He was preoccupied with his arm, but he's good now. So here I'm putting him on now. Abba, kulam shomim. You can English. They hear you. Your story, like what you want to say about today.
What can I tell you? 91, I don't know what to say anymore. Alive, and that's what it is. And thank God for this. What else can I tell more? I remember everything all my life since I was 12 years. I remember everything. But forgot a lot of things, not without survival. What else can I tell? Thank God, a family with kids and kids and kids, and thank God for this. And I'm live here 48 years in the United States, or lived 28 years in Israel, and thank God, whatever will happen, will happen. Will not live forever.
I want to say one thing with my father, that for every bad situation that happened, there was kindness out there, because he would not be sitting here without, he said, a multitude of Czechoslovakian farmers that passed him on from house to house. And as I was waiting for today and reading, and I was thinking, how did the Nazis did what they did? How'd they get away with it and like brainwash an entire nation? And not everyone was brainwashed, and that's what, and as we have turbulent events going on around the world, it's really important to remember that whatever it is not easy. But I'll let him.
And all my friends that came to Palestine and then fighting in Palmach in 48, 46, for all the war, none of them alive. All my friends that was none of them. No, nobody. One guy still in Israel, that's it. All of them here, all the friends in the United States, also meth, and that's it. Nobody else. That's what's left. And thank God for this.
Well,
Thank
you
thank
have a
you.
history.
Thank you very much, Ezra and
Yeah,
Gerry. I think we're going to try to get,
I was in Mlynov.
Helen in now. Emily, is it possible?
I think Olivia, my sister,
Olivia
is
is.
gonna
Okay.
unmute herself and get her on.
Okay, we don't know if this is going to work. Helen couldn't get on. So we're going to try it by phone and we'll see if this works. Go ahead, Olivia. You're on mute. You need to unmute. Okay. She'll unmute in a minute.
Yes,
Okay, we're ready for you.
okay. First of all, I want to say hello to all of you Mlynov descendants. And thank you so much, my dear niece, Olivia, that was able to connect us at least on the telephone. I was zoomed in and somehow, I don't know what happened. And I just got off and I couldn't get in. I am probably the oldest survivor of the Holocaust survivor of Mlynov. I am very sorry that I cannot be there in Zoom with you. I tried very hard. It just didn't work. I'm very sorry to miss to see Aviva from Israel, Gerry from Springfield, Massachusetts, Ezra. And there is also one person, I think, some Shechtman, that I was with his father in the woods. We were in the same bunker, and I was very much interested to meet him today, unfortunately. I live in Oakland, California. I am 95 years old. I distinctly remember very well Mlynov. I used to live on the same street as the big synagogue. I know you're very limited in time, so I don't want to keep you too long. Thank you very much, Olivia, and thank you, Howard, so much. We all have to be very thankful to Mr. Howard Schwartz, what he does in the memory of our city and our people. Thank you very much. I wish you all a good, happy, and healthy year, and hope maybe next time I can try to be on the Zoom with all of you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Helen and Olivia, for making that possible. And Emily, did you want to say just a few words, and then we'll have our final speaker after Emily.
Sure, thank you. And thanks, Liv, for helping Auntie Helen get on. I know it's hard.
No
with
problem.
some of the other generations. So just quickly, 2 years ago, my sister Olivia was contacted by a man on Ancestry.com who claimed to have information about our Zaidi and his family from Mlynov. Not knowing what to expect, my family responded saying that we had limited information on this topic and wanted to know more. You see, my Zaidi, Morris Nudler, had passed away 18 years ago. My great aunt Helen, who just spoke, lives across the country. We knew about my Zaidi's immediate relatives and limited information about his upbringing, but that was about it. There were so many missing pieces of his story, the story of our ancestors. As you might assume, that man on Ancestry.com was Howard. Howard's work has crafted an image of my history, our collective histories that I never believed could be possible. When Howard asked me to speak about what this community means to me as a member of the younger generation, I felt compelled to share my response with you. We are more than a community. We are an extended family bonded by past experiences. We have shared a connection that unites us. Though I am 2 generations removed from Mlynov, I feel closer to my family history knowing that all of you are now a living part of it. But as this younger generation, I feel that I have a responsibility to ensure that generations further removed from this history feel the same connection as I do to you. I know that our ancestors are looking down at us with pride, knowing that their descendants are now united. I hope that we can continue to maintain these relationships through social media, Zoom calls, phone calls, and in-person visits. This special community would not be possible without your continued participation, interest, and without Howard's incredible dedication. Thanks.
That was sweet. Thank you so much, Emily.
Thank you.
We have one special speaker at the end, and it's a descendant from the Goldsecker and Fishman family, Marc Siegel. Marc and I got to know through this work, and Marc has been doing amazing work in Moldova to help Ukrainian Jewish refugees. And we'd like to do a longer program about that for those who are interested. And so we'll be following up, but I asked him just to say a few words about his work. So Marc, if you're there.
Yep. Thank you, Howard. So very briefly, when the war started in Ukraine, I was asked to go over and help and have volunteered to help get people out, get supplies and medicines in, and also to keep Moldova afloat. I operate out of Chisinau, Moldova. I'll be going back there in a couple of weeks. And it's really incredible what the Moldovan Jewish community has been able to pull off. Moldova is the poorest country and one of the smallest countries in Europe. It's like stepping in a time capsule and going back to Israel in 1960s to the small Moshavim. And they have had 600,000 refugees cross into the country, of which 100,000 are still in country and have not been able to transit to the EU or to other places of safety. So the group that I work with mostly is a group called the Jewish Community of the Republic of Moldova. They have been able to get about 15,000 Jews to safety, either in Israel or into the EU, and they're continuing their work. And what I'd really like to impress upon people and to think about in terms of our history is there's still an enormous amount of, I'm talking about tens of thousands of Jews who are stranded in this war. And the situation is just getting worse because the Russians are going to try to starve and freeze out Ukraine and Moldova over the next few months. And it gets down to -30. And we have a backlog of people with nowhere to go. So anything that anybody here can do in terms of convincing people to sponsor Jews to get them to the United States, because they can't get into this country unless they're sponsored, similar to what happened to our ancestors. Or if you can't sponsor somebody, to try to support the Jewish community there, who has large numbers of people that they have to be responsible for and take care of, going into a winter where they're not even sure if they can heat their homes. So,
Marc, one of the questions being asked is, what does it take to sponsor somebody? If you can briefly tell us.
There's a procedure. The easiest way to find out is go onto the Department of Justice's immigration website or the Department of Homeland Security. Essentially, you have to say that you can guarantee the housing and food and taking care of a person, that they will not have to be paid for by any government funds. So there's no exact numbers, but you can get all the forms and everything you need off of the US government websites. Hopefully we're putting together, we have a lawyer who's helping us to put together a little explanation on the Jewish community of the Republic of Moldova's website.
Marc, can I post your email to this group that people are asking whether they can contact?
Yeah, I'll send you my email from to the Jewish community in Moldova. That's probably the easiest way. So if I'm traveling, somebody else there can answer questions. But yeah, it's, but again, I'd really like to emphasize, it's absolutely incredible what the Moldovans have done. They have housed 95% of the refugees that have crossed into their country and have stayed there are housed in people's homes. So some of my friends there are housing 3 families in small apartments. And, again, there's a country where the average income is $5,000 a year. So it's really a strain on the community there. So any help that we can get from anybody here to get people out of there into the EU or the United States would be really helpful. So,
How did you get involved in this? I'm just curious.
well, I work in the area of security and risk management of, anything that will kill you, terrorism, organized crime, natural disasters. So that's why I was first contacted and asked if I could help. And then what I do is I only work with locals. So I put together a network of local NGOs and civil society organizations, because, I always found the locals know how to handle what's going on in their country a lot better than the international agencies. And they've been very efficient in getting people set up. And, the locals, the local Jewish community on their own. This was without funding from the outside, and it is really a poor community. Set up a shelter, we're providing food, we're providing transportation to get people to EU countries, provided medical care. And then also, we're doing matching to get people put in people's homes.
So I'll coordinate. I see a bunch of questions, Mark, people are asking. So if you guys want to email me, that way I can just sort of funnel them to Mark instead of everybody sort of approaching him, and I'll try to answer. Mark and I talked, you can put in the chat or a thumbs up if you'd be interested in doing a deeper dive with Mark on a Zoom where we just sort of talk about this issue. So just put it in chat and we'll set up a follow-up session if there's enough interest. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you.
Howie, we have about 19 minutes left until noon, and what we wanted to do was give people an opportunity to ask a question directed at somebody or just make a brief comment. And in order to keep this somewhat manageable, you will notice that there is a button on the bottom of your screen and it says reactions. There's a little smiley face. And if you click on that button, you should see a bar at the bottom that says raise hand. And if you click that button, we will know that you have a question and it'll form a queue. And so let's try doing that. So you already should see people raising their hands. So if you want to make a comment, just try to keep it brief. We want to get through as many as we can. And then we're going to officially end the Zoom at noon. So Howie, I'll let you moderate this and I'll turn it back over to you. So this is everybody's time.
I'm not sure I can see everybody, but I'll just take them as.
I can. Do you want me? I can call him. I can do it.
Okay, I called on Arkady first.
Great.
Hi everyone. It's just a question, and it's somehow also relevant to today's situation. But on a picture of survivals from 1944, if I'm not mistaken, who were shown people who made up their way to DP camp and then further to Israel or to the States. One thing, and it's a little bit mystery for me, and I chatted with Howard, but maybe somebody can give me a little bit more light. After Soviet army approached further west, borders were completely sealed. It was impossible to cross it. So how these people managed to do so? How they managed their way west? Is there any information about technicalities?
So Mark, I don't know if you can go into chat, but Arkady's asking about, I think, how they got into Moldova.
No. I'm asking about picture of 1944 survivors with a lot of arrows and name. And you mentioned that they managed to get to either a U.S. controlled occupation zone or to DP camp, but how technically they managed to do so? What was their path through front line, through sealed Soviet border? How they managed? Is it all sneaky way? I cannot imagine it.
Yeah, I know I've heard Gerry, and I know Ezra was part of a Russian military unit who made their way into Germany. Gerry, I think, and other survivors were on trains, if I'm not mistaken, and made their way into U.S. occupied. Gerry, is that
actually, we were liberated by the Russian soldiers. They came to our
Yes.
area. I think it was in the spring of 1944.
44, yes, exactly. And then
Yeah.
what, because
Well,
basically what happened,
We
Go
lived
ahead, sorry.
under the Russian auspices. They still occupied the area until we left. We stayed in the Mlynov area for about a year.
רגע,
So
לפני שנסעת לישראל. איפה היית?
We're gonna have to put
Okay,
everybody on
wait.
mute again.
Do you want me, I just asked him, I said, after, where were you the last place before you went to Israel? So do you want me to, he's gonna, here's the
Sure.
answer.
Sure.
Okay, after you got out of the Russian army, before you went on the illegal immigration to Israel. Okay, English, where was the last place you were at before you got on?
is
the
this
ship
still
to go to-
directed to me?
Let me.
Yes.
Hang on, Jerry.
Talk English. Where did you pick up the boat to go to Israel?
מה?
So-
אנגלים תפסו אותנו.
That's okay. That's okay, Vivi. It's not, so I think Arkady, there were, my understanding
Stuff on
after
you.
talking to folks is there were multiple ways out from Mlynov. Some people came back to Mlynov and then left and then stayed for a few months, then took trains. Some were still in the Russian military. I think
Great.
maybe take another question.
Yeah, why don't we move
Yes,
over?
yes.
It's Sarah. You need to unmute. And everybody else, just reminder to mute yourself if you are not.
I can answer the question, not firsthand knowledge, but from what my mother told me, a group of young people, mostly women, started walking. They knew that they needed to get out of the Russian zone, and they kept walking at some danger. But maybe because it was a group of women, they had an easier time of it. But that's how my mother got to the, German American area. But one thing that I did want to say is that I do know the name of the farmer, the Ukrainian farmer who saved my mother and her brother and sister-in-law, and his name was Bogdan. And I know my uncle, as long as he lived, Mendel Tatelman, was in touch with Bogdan and his family. So I just want to reiterate that while there were many Ukrainians who were more than happy to kill Jews, there were also enough that saved them.
Thanks. Nancy?
So I had a question about the synagogue that you showed the picture of, and we were talking about that in our breakout group. I'm assuming that there's no services that are held there, that it's not used as a synagogue. And I'm just sort of wondering how it survived, because I thought, they just tried to destroy any of the religious buildings that there were. I'm really curious about that.
I don't have the answer myself. I don't know if anybody does. I just found those pictures online that were posted in the last, looks like 10 years.
Oh, I saw last night there was a link on I think it was Jewish Museum in Israel had from maybe 10 years ago, had photographs of it. And there was some write-up that it was used as a theater during the Soviet era. Now there were some efforts to preserve it. Inside was kind of a ruin, but the building was still standing.
It was not ruined. I lived in it and I was in the theater and was there in synagogue. Sorry, it's a story of Kiev synagogue. It was always intact. It was a very well-maintained building during Soviet time as well.
The great synagogue in Mlynov.
Was it used as a synagogue ever?
No.
No.
During Soviet time, it was only, I think you're talking about synagogue in Kiev, which used as a theater. It was 3 synagogues, actually it was 4, but 4th was from very weird Hasidic movement, so it was not respected well, let's call it this way. And 3 out of 3, 1 was operating full time, all the time. Like in the early 70s, my grandma was going there always to get matzah and everything, so it was operational. And from late 80s, second synagogue came up, and then from early 90s, that theater was returned to Jewish community, and it's still operational even today, even under Russian missiles.
Okay,
Thank
By the way,
move on to another question. Sorry, Howie, did you say something?
Okay.
I apologize. I don't know your name. I see msprettyp@aol.com. Yeah, you just need to unmute.
Actually, I wanted to clarify it. I'm not Miss Pretty P. That's my wife. I'm actually a Steinberg. My grandmother was Goldie Steinberg. And the question I had was, and I'm cousin to Charlie and to Gerald. They're both on. And the question I had, is there anything that we collectively, as a group, as this group can do, Howard, to aid the Ukrainian Jews? I know there's more strength in numbers, and I was just wondering whether or not there was something I'm sure the majority of us just, heartfelt want to do something, and just wanted to see if there was something we could do collectively.
I know there were earlier discussions in the Facebook group, and some people joined with Ezra's family in making a donation, but I think Marc is offering us individually. Maybe we can do something as a group. If anybody has ideas, because I think probably need maybe a follow-up session to brainstorm this. Why don't you put it in the chat right now, or send me an email, and it's good to see you. And I'll circle back to you, and we'll see if we can come up with something or have another session to discuss.
Great. Charles, make sure you unmute.
Hi, I just wanted to mention to any of you, if you're interested in another angle on all of the above, for instance, the Ukrainian crisis, there's a minor movement in the Jewish renewal community, particularly in the Jungian, the psychology community, about intergenerational trauma, that we all carry some trauma as Jews, for instance, and any minority would, and anybody, any group, any tribe, family that's been through difficult things, such as the Holocaust, as an example. There's a book by Rabbi Tirza Firestone, I put it in the chat, called Wounds into Wisdom. Wounds into Wisdom. And there's a following of, there was a rabbi, late rabbi named Rabbi Zalman Schachter Shalomi, who had he was advocating this thing also. So you can look into how we carry, looking into issues of mental health. I'm a psychologist. And so in terms of basically some degree of PTSD, depression, anxiety, avoidance of the past is another one of those things. This is sort of a way in, and there's steps from there to heal that trauma. So it's another angle on this thing. You can look up Tirza Firestone's book. Thanks.
Thanks, Charles. Vivi?
Two things. One, thank you, Charles. I think this Zoom call is a great APA study on how we're taking our trauma and processing it in a right way. All of us, it's probably like the first of its study on such a large scale. So just a pitch to Charles, Howard, Rich. Two, I asked my dad, and I'm saying it very nonchalantly, although none of this is nonchalant, Abba. So after the war, the Battle of Berlin, it was 1945. You went to Poland.
Yeah.
Then after Poland, he heard his brother was alive. They met in Poland.
6 months in Poland.
Okay.
and my brother ran away from the Polish army, and we went to Germany on the American zone.
And then they heard that the
Maybe
Irgun,
there 6 months,
okay,
and then send us to French, and they came there for the ship. Came the ship, put on 1,200 people. Which ship?
so I want to say this was in the middle of the night
Yes.
because all this was illegal immigration. The Irgun got them at night. They put them in at night and they left the port of France. And then I don't know how long it took, but they got to Israel on Belia. And in the port of Tel Aviv, they show you all the ships that came illegally and legally. Then my mom, a year and something later, came on Exodus, and then she has her whole story. But at least it kind of gives you the nonchalant version of what was totally not nonchalant. So
Thanks. Before Arkady, there was a comment from Dan. Dan, I will butcher your last name. I apologize, but you wanted to ask about efforts to connect people around DNA. Do you want to ask that question?
Sure. Thanks for bringing this up. Yeah. So, I just think it's really interesting to see how we're connected. And, I imagine a lot of people have done testing through 23andMe or Ancestry or one of these sites. And I had just been curious to see if any effort had been made to have, because I think some of these sites you can set up like the Mlynov project or something like that, where we could, join up together and sort of take individual looks at and to see if we can find additional family connections. So anyway, that was really what I brought up. And if anyone had any interest in doing that, or if it's already been started, I just wanted to say I'd be interested in learning more or helping out coordinating some of that stuff. That's all I got.
Thank you. Arkady, I apologize, but I want to give a couple people an opportunity who haven't to ask questions yet. And so again, apologies if I pronounce this wrong. Rhiannon?
Rhiannon, like the Fleetwood Mac song, if anybody likes Stevie Nicks.
Like the Fleetwood Mac song, right?
Yeah. I guess mine isn't necessarily like a general question for you guys, but a general question for our virtual shtetl. I couldn't help but notice that there are only a couple of people in my generation here, and I'm wondering why. And I hope what I ask of you is to go to the people that are my age and try to get them involved too. I know that there's a Facebook page, but that's not how people in my generation generally connect with each other. We've quit Mark Zuckerberg for the most part and all of his products. So I don't know. I'm curious to connect with more people my age. So if you have any, nieces, nephews, daughters, sons, whatever.
I think you're going to have to tell us what generation you've referred to your age and your generation.
My age, yes.
What is that?
I'm a millennial. I'm 30. How old am I? 32. So I just wanted to put a shout out for the millennials and Gen Z. I'd be really interested. I'm interested in connecting with all of you as well, but I'm particularly interested in our generation, which I think has pretty much like assimilated in a lot of ways. Those who are like, holding on to their ties to their family history and things like that. I'm curious about their perspective.
Thanks. Howie, you can work on the TikTok.
Yeah, if you want to send me a reminder, I can connect. I at least can put out an email to connect you to those you want to connect with.
Thank
Eleanor?
you.
I just want to make a quick comment, just talking about the connectivity and this incredible group. When Ezra was talking about getting on the ships and clandestinely do it, I just want to let you know that the connection is even wider, because even though my grandmother's in the Schwartz line and came over in 1911 with nothing, it was my grandfather on my father's side, who was one of the outfitters of 4 of those ships that left Baltimore clandestinely. He was involved with the Exodus and 3 other ships. And it just gives me chills to have all the connectivity. And if you have any questions about those clandestine ships, please contact me, because I do have a little bit of that history as well. Thank you.
All right, so we'll Arkady, you'll get the second to last word, and then Howie, you'll get the final word, and we'll make sure that everybody has access to the transcript and the video and so forth after the fact. Go ahead.
All right, just very quickly, someone who is in the video is my mother, who is from Ukraine, who I managed to extract, and now she's safely with me in Amsterdam. It's in this one. And second, Howard knows a little bit that I was on some kind of mission to understand this escape route. And just to share one piece of information, I heard important word, Poland. And the old Polish lady whom I met last year in Mlynov explained me how survivors managed to come to Poland. They all bought pretty much fake Polish ID cards. And this way they pretended to be Poles to come to Poland. Then in Poland, they changed their shoes again and told, sorry, we are not Polish, we are Jews and we want to go further. And because of anti-Semitism of communist Polish government, they will gladly provided opportunity to leave. So now I think this story through small puzzles coming together, which makes me and hopefully everyone else with one more bit of interesting information. Thank you. Thank you for it. It's nice that somebody confirmed my theory. Thank you.
So, yeah, I'm always amazed when we do these events. I mean, we could spend hours. I could spend hours, and I know we could spend hours talking. If you have thoughts about how to keep this community going and you're willing to volunteer, because I've been carrying the bulk of it and I need some help, feel free to shoot me an email. I find it very meaningful. I appreciate all of you being here and participating. And thank you, and Shana Tova, and I hope everyone has a healthy, happy, and fulfilling year, and safe. Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you for putting this together, Howard, as always. It was wonderful.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Howard.
Thank you, Howard.
Thank you, Howard.
Thank you, Howie.
Thank you.
Thank you, Howard. Thank you, Howard.
Howard, thank you.
Thank you, Howard.
Thank you, Howard.
Wonderful.
And
Thank
Rich
you.
Holt, thanks for doing all you did, Rich. Thank you. Thank you, Rich.
Thank you. Wonderful to see everybody.
Thank you to everyone being here today.
This is the best part, seeing everybody and being able to connect. I'm hoping that perhaps we could have a Mlynov Yisker book club.
You know.
זה מרחיק לכת, מלינוב book.
Sarah Herman's great-granddaughter. Was Joyce and Paul your grandparents?
Yes, they are.
אמרנו תודה.
Okay, so we're cousins.
Good to see.
Paul was my first cousin.
Oh, I miss him so much.
And we were very close with Paul and Joyce when we lived near each other in Massachusetts.
Oh, they told me a lot about that time. I wear his wedding ring every day since he passed away almost 15 years ago now. May his memory be a blessing.
Good to
For
see
sure.
good to see 6 or 7 of the Goldsecker family at this reunion.
I put your email in the chat to me. I'm Lynn Sandler, and I'd love to connect with you. And I haven't talked with Joyce in a long time, but I do miss her.
I would love to connect you. She's the busiest lady that's been retired for 50 years. I tell you what.
I can imagine that. We had so much fun together when for 2 years we were together, and then we connected for a long time afterwards. And I guess after Paul died, we talked a bit, and it's been a while.
Is it possible to get a Mlynov roster of emails?
Oh, that would be interesting.
That's a great idea.
Howard, don't you have that?
I have that. It's got complicated getting permission from some people wanted to do it and some didn't, but I'm willing to give it a try again.
Well,
Well,
But
if you
perhaps
connect-
get permission and the ones that don't will be omitted.
Yeah, you have my permission.
My
Well,
permission.
I'll email everybody and say who wants to be in it.
Right.
So Howie, I don't want you to have to be the bad guy here, but
Yeah, we need to.
I'm going to have to hit stop on this, and that's going to immediately cut everybody off. So let's do a sign off, and then if you do want to follow up with Howard, feel free to text or email him directly. He would love to hear from you, I'm sure. So I'm going to say goodbye.
Thank you.
Count of three, we'll all hit leave. 1, 2, 3.
I am.